are now tuned in to 66.6, The Boneyard, with your host, Boneyjangles. Hello everyone, I'm Boneyjangles and thank you for tuning in to this station's first broadcast. What we aim to do is delve into the stories of our listeners, stories of horror, dread, suspense. All I ask is sit back and relax and never look behind you. Our first story is by AG+, titled The Enemy. Now, let us bring down the mood. I flung myself through the door and vaulted the toppled long, dead refrigerator that served as an ineffective barricade in front of me. My legs propelled me through the room into a small hallway on the other side. I couldn't stop to eat the expired contents of the fridge, appealing to me despite the stench after several days without food. The shrieks of pain and cries for mercy around me spurred my body onward and filled me with unexpected energy in spite of my hunger. We were at war. I came to a halt in front of a small bathroom. A noise. Something behind the shower curtain. My fear heightened and images of the enemy flooded my mind. Merciless beasts, wearing human skin, devouring indiscriminately, accepting no pleas and respecting no argument. Zombies. It had begun as we expected, with a virus. The original infected were almost a cliché. There was no humanity left in them. Just mindless rage, twisted bodies, and some primal urge to consume others. Our generation had prepared with almost obsessive focus for this monster. The first wave was eradicated with almost laughable ease. We were not prepared for the adaptation. We were not prepared for the creature we bred by destroying the instantly recognizable zombie. A creature with far more tact. Most of the first zombies were killed at close range, you understand? Since longer range attacks were less likely to be fatal, we had trained ourselves, even before the outbreak, to equate infection with death when it came to zombies. A person died when their eyes clouded over and they started biting, not when you put a bullet in their head. The new strain of the virus still controlled the body, yes, but it left the other facilities to the host as well. Maybe you could pull a trigger on a hopelessly crazed character of your best friend, your spouse, your child. But what if there was a soul behind those eyes? If even as they attacked you, they sobbed and screamed in their own voice. All the virus needed was a moment's hesitation. I bet you'd hesitate. I did. Which is why now, I can only watch as my arm wrenched back the shower curtain and my hands reached for the cowering child. Why I could only beg forgiveness before the virus used my mouth to tear ragged, bloody hunks from his body. Why I couldn't even vomit as my hunger dissipated with the now sickeningly familiar taste of human flesh. We were at war, and I am the enemy. Our next and final story is by Stephanie Sizem, titled When the Circus Came to Town. The tents appeared in the middle of the night. Without preamble, there was some heated discussion at City Hall because not even the mayor knew they were coming. They must have worked out something, though, because the circus stayed. Our town wasn't big enough to support even a fair, so this was big news. That was how I found myself with my older brother Tommy and his friends that evening. I was just 15 then, and though we were in a small town now, my mother hailed from Boston. There was no way she could cut me loose to run around on my own. But if she'd known how bad Tommy and his friends really were, she would have known I was much better off alone. "How much money you got?" Frankie asked, punching my shoulder. Of all the three boys, I hated him the most. He regularly hit me, kicked me, and ridiculed me, while my own brother laughed about it. He was twice my size. I was a runt back then, but I dreamed of the day I could stand up to him. Stand up to them all. I gave him the 20 Mom had given me, but not the 5 I had tucked in my hat bill. If nothing else, I wanted to sneak a candy apple later. Dad was a dentist and we didn't have things like that around the house. They abandoned me when we walked inside the Midway. I'd never been to a circus before. There weren't many rides, but huge tents loomed everywhere. Barkers told us to come one, come all, see the magnificent beast of the wild, or horrifying freaks of nature. I laughed at that one. I'd ridden in with the freaks of nature. Still, I wanted to see a lion. They looked so majestic on television. Reluctantly, I parted with $2 and stepped inside. The tent smelled of sawdust, sweat, and dung, but inside were the most fantastic creatures I'd ever seen. I picked a peanut off the ground and fed it to an elephant, then sat on a bench to await the show. The lions were my favorite part. I knew they were big, but I never expected anything that huge. I held my breath when the lion tamer stuck his head in one of the creature's mouth. Its incisors looked as long as my fingers. Its back teeth, which I knew were called carnassals from the book my dad gave me, worked like scissors to cut and tear meat. No way would I have ever had the guts to stick my head in there. After the show, I debated spending another $2 to watch the same show again, but I really wanted that apple. As I made my way to the food trailers, a girl called out to me, "Read your fortune for $1. The sight of her took my breath. For the rest of my life, I'd dream about her face. I wish that she could have seen her own fortune instead of mine that night. She didn't deserve what happened to her. I stared at her transfixed. Her eyes were 2 different colors. I wonder if she wore a contact lens to achieve the effect in order to be more striking. One was icy blue and the other brown, like mine. The effect was jarring, even more so because she had lovely, long black hair, full lips, dressed like a genie from a TV show, with her smooth, tan belly bared. Hormones trumped hunger. I let her lead me into the tent. She took my palm and stretched it out in front of her. She talked for a while, giving me vague predictions. Then she gave me a long look and said, "You need to stand up for yourself. Do not let others control your fate." I always wondered about that later, if she really saw that. It proved to be good advice I wish I heeded. She walked me out after my reading, her hand tucked into my arm. "Well, what do we have here?" Frankie boomed. "The little monkey has a girlfriend." Her hand tightened on my arm and then she smiled. "I'm taking a break." Frankie caught her arm as she tried to walk by, and Tommy and his friend James blocked her. I wanted to tell them to leave her alone, but my voice was frog-hung in my throat. "Hang on," Frankie said. "I got $1. I want my fortune told. Matter of fact," he leered at her, "what will a 10 get me?" To my horror, he grabbed her waist and pulled her against him. She struggled free and snarled something in a foreign language. Then she spat on his shoe. Frankie backhanded her, then dragged her into a tent. I turned to run and James tripped me. I went sprawling into the dust, and my mouth filled with blood. James hauled me up and I heard a click as he opened the switchblade he always carried and pressed it against my back. "One move and I'll slice your spinal cord," he said. "Snitches end up in ditches." It only lasted a few minutes, but it seemed like an eternity. They brutalized that girl. I heard her struggle at first, then nothing. That nothing terrified me. I was crying, blood and snot choking me. People walked right on by and nobody seemed to notice something was wrong. Something was horrible. The newspaper said her father found her naked and beaten in the tent. It was 2 days before she could give the police a description. I was relieved when the police pulled up in front of our house. "Don't you say a word," Tommy hissed, "or I swear on my life I'll end you." I wish I could say that I spoke up, told the police everything, but I didn't. I thought her description would be enough and the DNA, but I misjudged small-town politics. Frankie, Tommy, and James spun some story about the girl being a prostitute and soliciting them for money. They say she grew angry when they didn't have enough, and threatened to cry, if they didn't bring her money. They say another girl had beat her to make her story look real. The judge closed his briefcase and let them go. We walked outside together. I have never felt so sick, ashamed. Tommy and his friends stood beside me in their fresh suits and ties, looking like altar boys. The old gypsy woman approached. She muttered something, then made a sign in the air with a gnarled finger. Frankie stepped toward her and James caught his arm. The girl sobbed against her father, her beautiful face still swollen and discolored. She whispered something to the old man and pointed at me. The old woman's eyes narrowed and she made another sign. "That's enough," my father said, and led us away. The circus disappeared, and within a week, my brother and his friends were dead. Tommy got his hand caught in the garage disposal at the restaurant he worked after school. As he chewed his arm, they thought the pain was making him delusional, because he was screaming something about the lion's teeth. He bled out before the ambulance got there. James fell off a ladder while he was helping his father patch their roof. The fall severed his spinal cord. Frankie died the most horribly of all. He wrecked around the Johnson's Bend one night, and his car caught on fire. Rescuers said they'd never forget his screams. I figured he was still screaming and burning in the place he went. I dreamed about the old woman every night. She said, "Your crime is silence. You stood quietly and let evil reign, thus sealed your fate." One morning, my tongue felt funny. When I peered in the mirror, it looked like a piece of bark was attached to it. It felt like bark too. Mom was still in her room, so I didn't bother her. I somehow knew it was my time. I went to the woods behind our house. My steps grew heavier as I walked, and I could barely drag my feet through the leaves. When I looked down, my legs no longer looked human. They were forming into a tree trunk. Roots curled from my toes and spiked into the ground. I raised my hand to feel my tongue and my arm froze there. Bark raced down it, falling in place like Legos connecting, covering what was human. With no surprise, I saw the girl walk out of the woods. "I know it wasn't your fault," she said. "I begged my Baba for mercy. She said, you must learn a lesson. You will be a tree until you grow and mature enough to bear fruit. When the first apple falls from your tree, you will be human again. I hope you will always stand up for yourself and others after that." It took 3 years, but I'm still thankful for that lesson. I do hope you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. Tune in next time for more stories like these. Feel free to send any story that you want to hear my way. I'll be more than happy to read it. Until then, my name is Boneyjangles, and you're listening to 66.6, The Boneyard. Stay safe.